I am honored to have today's guest with us. I've got Scott Bennett, the author of Shell Game, and Scott is an American patriot. He is a U.S. Army Special Operations Officer and a global psychological warfare counterterrorism analyst. Scott, welcome.
Jason, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. You've done so much. This Shell Game report that you've written is stunning. And I mean, I only just found out about you earlier this week. And in many ways, Scott, you represent exactly the reason I created Crowdsource the Truth. You are a man of vast military and intelligence experience who I had no knowledge of before members of the Crowdsource community started sharing your videos with me. And now I'm pleased to be able to have you with us so we can help get your message out. Can you tell us a little bit, Scott, about Shell Game, what it is, how you discovered it, and what is happening right now?
Yeah, and I'm honored to be with you, and I'm honored that your Crowdsource people, have shared with you the material. It's always miraculous how these things are unfolding like a slow avalanche. But that's just the way, God sort of unfolds all of this in a synchronistic way. And we always have to be careful with who is out there, who is talking, what they're providing, because there are agents, there are sub-agents, there are contractors, there are informants, there are deep state counterintelligence people. So the best way to really verify people and their honesty and their integrity is to have a community of people that you trust provide you with, listen to this guy, or have you seen this, or have you talked about this? So that's the proper way. Although it takes some time, it's the way to vet people, and we always have to vet people. And to get back to your question, this really, in a single explanation, the Shell Game material, the Shell Game book, which people can go to the website, shellgamewhistleblower.com. All of the materials are up there. There's a Twitter page, there's a YouTube page where the video's at. This originally was produced in 2012, on September 25th, 2012, in fact, when I was still a Army officer, a psychological warfare officer. I had a top secret SCI clearance, and I had debriefed a human intelligence asset named Brad Birkenfeld. And Brad Birkenfeld had been a Swiss banker. He had been in Switzerland. He had brought over 19,000 bank accounts to the Department of Justice in 2007, 2008. And one interesting thing had happened. Edward Snowden was the CIA asset in Switzerland at the time that had been part of the CIA operation to turn Birkenfeld into an espionage asset while he was still a Swiss banker. And there's an interesting confirmation of that in the movie Snowden by Oliver Stone, who, incidentally, I've been in contact with and provided Shell Game to before he made the movie.
Wow.
One of the things he included in his film was one of the parts that I debriefed him about, which was Brad Birkenfeld was in a bar, and the CIA had tried to get him in a drunk driving situation,
Right.
and had entrapped him and had got him arrested in Switzerland. And Brad was put into a jail cell, and the CIA came in the next day and flashed their badge and said, we're the CIA. We want blah, 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 blah. So Oliver Stone included that in his film Snowden, and of course he made it look like a Pakistani banker was the culprit. But in actuality, that was Brad Birkenfeld, because Brad told me that story. He told me so many fascinating stories about his whole saga, and it's like a constellation of different stars moving towards a center of mass. Brad Birkenfeld was coming from Switzerland, and he was a Swiss banker, and he had seen terrorist financing. He saw money laundering. He had hundreds of millions of dollars that he was genuinely, trying to bring over to the United States to expose. And he went to the Department of Justice, and he went to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He went to the Senate, and finally the Senate gave him a subpoena because he couldn't disclose or divulge anything until he went and got a subpoena. So it was fascinating that no one in the government would give him a subpoena. No one would let him talk. No one would let him open his briefcase of 19,000 bank accounts. And Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer and Loretta Lynch and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were all in charge of the government when he was trying to do this. So you ask yourself, wait a minute, why was that? Are you on the American people's side, or are you on your own side, Mr. Obama, Mrs. Clinton, Eric Holder, Lanny Breuer? And I say that I'll expand upon it later because Brad Birkenfeld and Union Bank of Switzerland, when he brought all this over, he finally gets in front of the Senate and he discloses this material. And the next thing you know, they classify everything he said, and then they prosecute him with it. They call him, a IRS, a tax fraud guy or something like that. Now, they threw him in jail for 39 or 40 months. And I mean, it's a horrendous story. And he wrote a book, Lucifer's Banker. But that's his trajectory and what happened to him. And a guy named Kevin Downing and Kevin O'Connor at the Department of Justice, and Rudy Giuliani was sort of connected to this too back in 2007, 2008, because he was connected to a financier named Abdullah Aziz, which Brad Birkenfeld had brought as one of the rich terrorist financier guys. And that's what resonated with me, because here's a guy, terrorist financing, that is killing our soldiers by getting money to buy IEDs and bombs and bullets and stuff. And the military should have acted upon his Swiss bank revelations. We could have shut down all of this money, but they didn't. Instead, they shut down Brad Birkenfeld and threw him in prison. And Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, then made a deal with Union Bank of Switzerland with the Swiss government in 2008, 2009. The financial crash was just about to occur. State Department cables were talking about this, talking about Brad Birkenfeld, talking about, quote, diamonds in the toothpaste.
Right.
And Brad's clients, Igor Alenikov, who had been targeted by the State Department and the CIA back in the late 70s or 80s, so he may have been a double agent. They were also talking about other clients of Brad's. But it was interesting because I was at the State Department at the time these cables were written. Now, I didn't divulge these cables. They came from Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, had sent Brad Birkenfeld these cables that disclosed the State Department communications from Hillary Clinton involving Eric Holder, Lanny Breuer, who were the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice, along with Loretta Lynch, along with Timothy Geithner at Treasury, along with the Barack Obama, president, and additionally to a law firm called Covington and Burling.
Right.
Now, Covington and Burling represented Union Bank of Switzerland. It also represented Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and a variety of Middle Eastern countries. It's a huge law firm. But Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer had were employed by Covington and Burling before they joined the Obama administration, and then they returned to Covington and Burling after they left the government. So
this is no different
Burling,
than what we hear in so many different industries where these individuals enter the government, change policy, carry out some action that would seem to benefit the corporation, and in this case it's a law firm, and then they go right back to that law firm. Are they, as you said, working for the people of the United States, or are they working for the benefit of these wealthy lawyers and businesses?
Yeah. Now, I'm going to kind of jump around, so all the pieces of the puzzle are going to slowly come together, but Covington and Burling has, if you Google them, and you've got them up right now, you will see Eric Holder works for them. You will see Lanny Breuer works for them. You will see Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn's attorney, works for Covington and Burling.
Wow, that sounds bad.
It's very bad. And it should be filed as an amicus brief to the court in Washington to say that Covington and Burling has deceived General Michael Flynn, and therefore his plea deal should be removed because Michael Flynn has been deceived because the law firm representing him is a party to terrorist financing disclosed in State Department cables and specifically disclosed in a U.S. military officer's whistleblowing report entitled Shell Game.
Scott,
So
how
that
long
is
has
enough.
General Flynn known about that?
I honestly, I don't know if he knows about it at all. Now
Wow.
we've communicated. Yeah, we don't know. I mean, we play, sort of, half baked, half in, out, half out. We know there's operatives and intel people trying to get as much into intel and trying to find out what we know, so we don't disclose everything. But the bottom line is, everybody who watches your show, Jason, and listens to this should pick up their phone, pick up their email, computer, and file a letter, an email, a phone call to the White House and say, President Trump needs to watch Jason Goodman's show about this material. President Trump needs to act on this intelligence because it explains why he's being undermined at the White House, why he's being betrayed by members in the Department of Justice and the FBI. It explains why terrorist financing has been going into various areas in the theater of the Middle East, which President Trump promised to get out of. That's why the American people elected him. So the main goal is to see the president as the running back carrying the football, and we're trying to open up alleys, for him to run through to get to the end zone. And the end zone being, freedom, liberty, the Constitution, transparent government, not this deep state parasitic environment where we're all slaves on their plantation. So we're working to give this to the president, but push him as well, because there are a lot of actors that are interfering with him, giving him bad intelligence, and pursuing an objective that is not the American people's objective. And if he's not careful, if he doesn't realize he's surrounded by a lot of bad people, bad intel, and liars, he's going to be a one-term president, and that could be part of their angle. He's never been in government, so he doesn't know the double-crossing mentality of a lot of these people. But not to get sidetracked, to close off the Covington and Burling chapter, you've got Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, another guy named Roger Zakheim. Now, Roger Zakheim was the son of my boss at Booz Allen Hamilton, Dov Zakheim. Dov Zakheim was the comptroller at the Pentagon when the cruise missile hit the Pentagon and killed the financial analysts.
You're talking about 9/11.
9/11. That's right.
I agree with you that that's what happened. Cruise missile.
Yeah, and we've heard that from a lot of different parties. I'll say personally, I drove by the Pentagon the next day because I was doing my doctorate up at Catholic University.
Right.
And when I drove by George Washington Parkway, all I saw was a big blue tarp covering the hole. No skid marks, no luggage on the grass, no shattered metal on the grass, no great furrow in the grass like a 757 would have caused if it barreled into the building. The only thing I saw was a blue tarp covering the hole on the Pentagon. And when I reflected upon it years later, it struck me like a hammer against a bell. How could I have missed that? Because I didn't wake up to 9/11 until much, much later. And it's amazing that the American public have been so deceived and lulled to sleep. But everybody has their own awakening point. Right. So I can just say Dov Zakheim was my boss, my employer at U.S. Central Command, because I was a contractor.
I'm not able to find Mr. Zakheim here on the. How do I spell Zakheim?
Zakheim. Roger Zakheim. It's Z-A-C-K. I'm sorry, Roger, and then Zakheim is Z-A-C-K-H-E-I-M.
He's not showing up on the search on the Covington website for some reason. Perhaps he's left.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will send you the the photo that I screenshotted with Roger Zakheim's face and the Covington and Burling website where he left. So maybe this is resonating in a very powerful way to say Roger Zakheim was not only employed by Covington and Burling in 2014, but he was also the general counsel at the House Armed Services Committee when I was filing my report about Shellgame, filing it all about Brad Birkenfeld, his Swiss bank accounts, everything that he had disclosed to me, I'd sent up to the House and the Senate, Armed Services Committee, intelligence committees, and his father was my boss at U.S. Central Command running the terrorist financing operation. Yep, that's him. And right there on the far right corner, that's the picture that was at Covington and Burling. So you'll see a history of him that he worked at Covington, but it's very, very suspicious. So Roger Zackheim, Dov Zackheim, uh, and Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, Stuart Eizenstat. He was identified in the Hillary Clinton cables and emails. Stuart Eizenstat was a Covington lawyer who has advised Hillary Clinton, the State Department, the Hillary and the Clinton Foundation, and of course the Clinton Foundation. We saw Ginny Rhee, who's now on Mueller's team. So there's a Covington angle, Stuart Eizenstat, Roger Zackheim, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, and it opens up Loretta Lynch, why they gave Union Bank of Switzerland a slap on the wrist, a 2% fine. No one went to jail, no one was prosecuted, and instead Brad Birkenfeld was sent to prison. And all of this was buried. Nothing was given to the United States military. Now that's where I come in, because I had been in the Bush administration from 2003 to 2008. I then joined Booz Allen Hamilton. I was recruited from Colonel Jeff Jones. He had been the 4th Psychological Operations Commander, one of the most renowned wizards of psychological warfare. He had approached me after I had given a briefing to Donald Rumsfeld and General Dick Myers at the Pentagon. Colonel Jones had contacted me and said, "I'm putting a team together for psychological warfare, public communications, and I want you on it." So I went with him, I met him, and I left the Bush administration and joined Booz Allen Hamilton. And he said, "I'm going to put you into the Army, give you a direct commission, so you learn everything there is to know about what the Army does in psychological warfare, and then I'm going to put you into the State Department as the liaison officer to the State Department, to General Del Daly, who was the General of Joint Special Operations Command, and you're going to be our guy and doing psychological warfare at the State Department Counterterrorism Office. You're going to be at SOCOM at Crystal City. You're going to be at the Pentagon," and that's where I jumped in and immersed myself. And I then later on went to Army training, and I was given a direct commission. And a direct commission is something that's given doctors and lawyers. And I think I was probably the only person that received a direct commission who was not a doctor or a lawyer, but had advanced degrees, and I had, a lot of background in government and in various areas. And I had been given a direct commission. So that's something that threw a lot of people off. How did this guy get into this position? Well, there's very good reasons for it. So I was given a direct commission, and incidentally, everything is verifiable. Everything is documented. So no one can call me a liar or say I've invented anything. Everything is on, and nothing's classified. I don't discuss anything classified, although I know quite a lot.
Pause you for a second there, Scott, because I'm just looking at this Google Maps here, this Google Earth representation of Booz Allen Hamilton, and I've noticed this before. Booz Allen Hamilton is in an area of the map here of Washington, D.C. that very conspicuously totally avoids 3D representations of the buildings. One of the most interesting features of Google Earth is that it allows you to, in a very, very detailed manner, evaluate buildings and get extremely detailed maps. Obviously, there are sensitive areas in Washington, D.C., and we're looking at one of those areas which is completely devoid of 3D buildings. So Booz Allen Hamilton, for people who maybe don't know, is the same company, of course, that Edward Snowden was at. It's, that's what's depicted in the Oliver Stone film that you referenced, where Edward Snowden saw all this incredible spying on U.S. citizens, and he revealed, was it PRISM? Was that what Snowden revealed? Prison and Thin Thread and a variety of other things. Now, Edward Snowden, and I won't go too much into it, but Edward Snowden knew me from our time at Booz Allen Hamilton because he worked in Hawaii, and we worked on, I was psychological warfare, he was more NRO, National Reconnaissance, NSA stuff, but he and I worked with the same people, I'll put it that way, and we knew the same programs and operations. And it sort of enters this Twilight Zone moment because Edward Snowden had also known Brad Birkenfeld. He was the CIA operative that had been part of the tracking of Birkenfeld and getting him into a DUI
and Snowden had revealed to Glenn Greenwald when he left the country, that was one of the things that turned him against this whole deep state CIA NSA operation. Now, the other thing that had
Because they
turned him
basically
was
targeted that guy and got him in
that's right.
trouble for something that they caused.
That's right. That's right. I mean, Brad told me the story, and this was before Snowden was ever public. Brad sat down with me and told me the whole story about CIA getting him into a DUI, then coming in the next day and flashing their CIA badge. And that's after that he left the country because he knew something was up. He probably thought he was going to be killed. Now Snowden, when I filed my report Shell Game, and we sent it, Brad Birkenfeld and I worked on it. We sent it to General James Mattis around August 1st, 2012. James Mattis was commander of U.S. Central Command at the time, and that's the same James Mattis that is Secretary of Defense right now. And when that torpedo was fired at James Mattis, 28 days later, General Michael Flynn wrote about the substance of what we were discussing, which was Saudi Arabia, Qatar using bank accounts for establishing secret operations to establish in Syria and Libya and elsewhere. So that was August 28th when General Michael Flynn came out. On September 11th, 2012, like a couple weeks later, Brad Birkenfeld was paid off $104 million.
Wow.
And on the same day, the Benghazi attack occurred.
Right.
Now, as someone who's held a top secret clearance and has known secret operations and diversion operations and psychological warfare, I can say without a shadow of doubt, this was the CIA, DIA, certain branches in the military that were coordinating a deception operation. So all your eyes were in Benghazi, but the real story, the real issue that they did not want light on was the fact that Brad Birkenfeld was paid $104 million to be silent and not mention any of the stuff that I'm disclosing today, not mention my name, not mention the fact that I was a military officer, and not mention that all of this terrorist financing had been denied military. Now, I can say that because here's how Brad and I got together. When I was at Booz Allen Hamilton, and I was fighting a war. I didn't join Booz Allen Hamilton. I didn't join the military because I wanted a job. I wanted salary. I didn't join because of my own vanity or my vocation. I joined the military in Booz Allen Hamilton to fight a war and win it and go home. I joined to serve my country. And that's why I went out to Washington in 1998 and joined the Republican Party. And I worked at the Heritage Foundation. I worked at Leadership Institute. I worked at all the conservative Republican groups. I joined the Bush administration. I went out to serve my country because I was offended by a lot of the liberal Clinton type of things that were going on. I didn't agree with it, and I thought this is going to destroy the country. So I went out on a mission, and I was always driven by a mission. So when I went into the military, everything else was put aside, and I went into fight. And I went through military training. I went through officer training, and I was 38 years old, so I was one of the oldest guys going through it. But I went through it to serve my country. And then the next thing, after I finished military training, I got my direct commission. I was given my top secret SCI clearance. I then was transitioned to go to U.S. Central Command to work under Dov Zakheim in terrorist financing. And I had been briefed by Colonel Jeff Jones. This is what you're going to be doing. This is who you're going to be working with. And I won't go into too much of what he briefed me on, but he had essentially advised me of the nefarious skullduggery of Dov Zakheim and its connection to 9/11 and other things. So I went down to basically be a mole and probe and dig and find out where all of this terrorist financing was going on and what was going on, not to just work on a contract. And when I started really digging and making a lot of noise, and I was a little bit naive on who was really behind a lot of it, when I started exposing things, the next thing I know, after I'd been down at U.S. Central Command for about 4 or 5 months, and I'd done a lot of work, and I discovered a lot of contractor fraud. I saw a lot of just lethargy, and there was a kind of a sickness, a state of not a real serious war, but just a paycheck and a contract. When I started discovering a lot of that, making a lot of noise, giving a lot of briefings, finding out that very few people really understood the nature of the fight, the next thing I know, I am stopped at the front gate at MacDill Air Force Base, held at gunpoint, and ordered out of my car. And police officers called under the suspicion of a DUI. Now, I thought this was a training operation because I was ready to be deployed. I had a top secret clearance, and they do this in various,
And
practices.
you weren't drunk, obviously, right?
No. But that's why I thought it was a test. I thought this is going to be an operation to test my resolve, test my fortitude, to see if I'm, of the echelon to be, engaged in top secret SCI activities, covert and overt. So I went along with it. I thought,
pun.
yeah. And I went along with it. I sort of, I kept my mouth shut, and the guards at the gate pulled me out of my car and held me to the side. And I had a concealed carry permit, to carry weapons. I was a Defense Department courier too, so I was high up there. I was very high in the counterterrorist intelligence realm. That's why I thought this has got to be a test. Well, the next thing I know, to make a long story short, the Tampa Police Department comes out. They arrest me. They take me in.
Wow.
Again, well, for a DUI suspicion. And they put me through the tests. Of course, nothing is there. There is no alcohol. There is no DUI. They let me go. Probably to see. And I thought, is this person morally strong enough to endure interrogation? If you're caught in Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that, are you going to come apart of the seams? Are you going to break? Are you going to be a whimpering little baby and tell them what you have? And if you're that type of person, you're not able to be deployed as an officer, and that's what I was going to do. They were going to deploy me down range. So I thought this was an operation. Well, to make a long story short, it wasn't an operation. It wasn't a test. It was instead an ambush to arrest me, and then use that arrest to go back to Booz Allen Hamilton on base and suspend my clearance because I had been arrested, not prosecuted or judged, but been arrested.
Right.
And then when they suspend your clearance, then they fire you, and they made up an excuse that, oh, well, your orders haven't been properly done, or your housing wasn't done. And I didn't say anything. I thought, again, this has to be a test. Well, next thing, they suspend my clearance, they kick me off base, they fire me from Tampa, Florida, and they send me back up to Washington, D.C. And I return, and nothing happened for like 9 months. And I had been given an attorney named David Shalala. And David Shalala was Donna Shalala's nephew. Donna Shalala was connected to the Clinton Foundation.
Wow.
And David Shalala, who I thought, I didn't really know Donna Shalala's connection with, Hillary Clinton, and I knew she was the HHS secretary, and I knew she was connected with the Clinton Foundation, and I knew Clinton Foundation was among many of the other ones that were suspected in terrorist financing, but there's so many that I didn't put all these pieces together, and probably for my good, because had I put this stuff together and really made a lot of noise, I probably wouldn't be here. They probably would have killed me. But subsequently, I absorbed so much stuff and found so much stuff and reported so much stuff that it just went like a nuclear bomb. It went like a dirty bomb all over the place. So David Shalala is my attorney, and he said, oh, this is just a big snafu. It's going to go away, but don't say a word. Don't make any noise. And again, I'm thinking maybe this is a test. And I go to court, and Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, connected to the law firm Covington and Burling.
Wow.
Yeah, you couldn't make this up. Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington is my judge, and they put me in front, and here's what they did. They charged me with 18100-1, making a false statement on a government housing form. Because I was a military officer, I'd filled out a housing form for temporary housing on base, circled 3 buttons saying my orders were being processed, how long I was on active duty. And they said because my orders hadn't arrived yet, and because I was a reservist, when I circled active duty, that was a false statement. And I said, well, wait a minute. I am an active reservist. This is the only button that you circle. This is a military thing. Why am I being even questioned by a Department of Justice, U.S. attorney in Florida about this? Yeah. Everything was very weird, and it was the first time in the history of the United States subsequently that they charged a military person with making a false statement on a housing form. They charged me with wearing my uniform without authorization. I mean, there's so many lies. They had a guy named Joel Droba, a Colonel Joel Droba, stand up and falsely testify that he was my commanding officer, and he wasn't. It was a different person altogether. All of these things were happening, and they charged me with 100-1, making a false statement, wearing a uniform without authorization, and having weapons on base. Now, I had a gun safe that Booz Allen Hamilton had transported down to base, and it was it hadn't been registered yet on base security or something because I had been in training. But they used this to prosecute me, and David Shalala didn't represent me, didn't put any paperwork up that disclosed who I was. Subsequently, the CIA invented all sorts of lies that I had dressed up as a police officer up at Fort Myer, and it was by Wackenhut, which is a subsidiary of the CIA. Firm. Yeah. So Wackenhut gives a false testimony about me, and again, I'm like a deer in the headlights. I don't know what's going on or why all this is happening, but my oath as an officer and my pride in the military tells me, I'm not going to say anything. So I didn't vocally really defend myself until, again, I thought this would all be appealed, and I could, at some point, if it needed to be, after the military had stepped in and really looked at this, because I was trying to save everybody embarrassment. Mm-hmm. But instead, they had this quick trial. No documents that I had or witnesses that I had were put in front. David Shalala basically sold me under the bus, and next thing you know, I'm put on a bus and I'm sent off.
Are we looking at David Shalala?
No, that's not him. That's not him. No,
it's hard to find.
And yeah, convenient, isn't it? And who knows, how this will all be coming out because it's still in the court process. But David Shalala basically sold me under the bus, Donna Shalala's nephew. And next thing I know, I'm sent on a bus in an orange jumpsuit into prison.
What?
On my way out to California from Florida. So in Florida, I take off on a bus, and I'm furious. I can't believe this is happening. Any moment, I'm thinking somebody's going to come through the door and say, Lieutenant, you've passed the test. Okay, now you're going to Afghanistan in a top secret area. I honestly thought that was going to happen at any moment. And I'm on a bus going out, and I get to Oklahoma. And the bus turns around in Oklahoma for no reason. I'm supposed to be going to California. It turns around in Oklahoma, and it takes me to Pennsylvania. And I'm furious about that. And I tell them, I'm supposed to be in California. What am I doing here? Well, you're just here. So, so I'm in a camp. And it is for doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers, all these people.
Right.
And I'm put into a camp, and that is where I meet Brad Birkenfeld. That's where the nexus happens.
By total chance.
Yeah. White hat, divine appointment, all of the above.
So now wait a minute, Scott. So this all happened before you wrote the Shell Game book. Is that right?
That's correct.
So why did they want to throw you in jail? Because you had uncovered. I lost that part.
Well, I think it was seeing me as a danger, seeing me as I was reporting the things that were suspicious. I was reporting things about foundations in Saudi Arabia.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In retrospect, is it possible that someone there had come to you in a not so obvious way and maybe asked unassuming questions suggestive of, hey, would you be on board for X, Y, and Z, and then observed your honest answers and said, this guy's not our guy, let's get him the hell out of here?
That's most likely what happened. Or someone did exactly what you described and said, that's the guy to send in and get Birkenfeld. That's the guy to dig up and report this stuff.
So they might have done this to actually help you get to Birkenfeld? Wow, that's complicated.
It's complicated, and ultimately it'll all come out. It'll all be disclosed because everyone will be a witness. Everyone will testify, and including Brad and myself, before a Senate, a House, a presidential committee, a second counsel, and a second attorney that is appointed by Trump. Right. All of this is waiting to be opened like a Christmas morning full of presents.
All right.
And
how long were you in jail there?
I was in jail from July 2011 until February 2014.
Holy cow.
So I meet, a lot of this stuff is still a mystery. I just share what honestly I saw and did and know. And having met Birkenfeld in a prison, and there are a lot of people there. I mean, there were, and I won't get too much into it, but there were guys there that were doctors and lawyers and, mafiosa guys. And there was also people there in the military. One was a Vietnam Delta Force guy who had witnessed CIA firebombing prisoner of war camps. He was one of the witnesses in the book Kiss the Boys Goodbye by Monica Jensen. His name was Casino Man. I won't tell his real name, but Brad knows him as well. Brad and I and Casino Man sat down and talked about all of this stuff. So it was like going to a think tank.
Wow.
I mean, some brilliant lawyers were there, and that's where I learned a lot of the law that I know now. I was the only one who could type, really. There's few guys who could, but I could type really fast. So needless to say, when I'm in a prison camp, I have all these mafia guys coming up to me asking me to write their letters and their motions, and the lawyers coming up to me saying, "Scott, can you write a motion for here?" So I'm like the secretary in law school.
Hey, whatever keeps you from getting murdered in there, right?
Well, talk about the Italians coming up to me saying, "Scott, what you did for Manny, this big 30-year, Don Corleone guy," saying, "Scott, anything you need, man, what you did for Manny was outstanding." So I'm protected by the mafia guys there.
Wow.
I'm protected by the Italian mafia. I'm protected by the Russian mafia.
Wow.
And I'm protected by the Hispanic mafia because I'm working in the education department in a federal prison teaching the Hispanics English, right?
But it had to be difficult. I mean, it's good that you had this protection, but they just totally railroaded you and stuck you in jail.
Yeah, it is a form of torture. It is agonizing. It's agonizing for your family. It's a betrayal on the deepest level that you can imagine because, my father was a Marine Corps aviator in Vietnam. My uncle was an aviator in the Air Force. My other uncle was a frogman. And my other uncles and grandparents date back to World War II and World War I. So
wow.
I'd come from a very military family, but a truthful family and a Scottish family. I was born in Scotland, so I had a different sort of a character, I guess. And it was a deep betrayal. It was such an offense. Not at the time. I honestly had thought this has got to be a misunderstanding. There's got to be a blockage in the bureaucracy somewhere. They just need to hear me. They need to see me. They need to know this.
Right.
So as much as I was pounding on the door, trying to get out, I'm also absorbing the material that Brad Birkenfeld and I start discussing. And it comes to me when I looked up in the sky one time and I saw this big white chemtrail cross against a blue sky. And I thought to myself, at the moment I looked up, I thought, my mission was to find bad guys and their money. Here I am in a federal prison, and I found 19,000 bank accounts with hundreds of millions of dollars going through Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Daesh figures in Libya, Syria, Iraq. And I didn't discover this in Central Command. I discovered this in prison from the very whistleblower who had the documents in the WikiLeaks. This is my mission. My mission by the military that appointed me and by the American people that entrusted me and that I swore my hand and oath to God to support the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is my mission. And when I looked up in the sky and thought that, I saw this big chemtrail cross in the form of an X about 100 feet above my head, and I'm right in the middle of the nexus, and it was the Scottish flag. The Scottish flag is the white X over a blue field. And it just personally, it struck me that this was my personal mission. I had been put on this mountaintop in Pennsylvania in a prison for this reason, for this day, to take this material and report it. And from that day forward, I took it and I typed on a typewriter for really 2 years, just typed, and that's what Shell Game is. It is typed on a typewriter. I didn't transfer it into font of, Times Roman or turn it into a book. I wanted people to read this like they were in prison, reading this with the scratch typewriter scroll and the faded letters and the documents and the letters and everything that Brad and I had. I wanted them to read it so they knew this wasn't a piece of fiction. This was This was expressed through heart-wrenching agony and sorrow, and it was like Joseph in Pharaoh's prison. And I had released it to the Senate, the House, the military. I sent it to General Mattis. I sent it to Ray Odierno. I sent it to Martin Dempsey. I sent it to General Jeff Jones at U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command. I sent it to Bill Nelson. I sent it to Dianne Feinstein. I sent it to all these people, and all of their names are in Shell Game, a whole list of everybody, as well as another book I have called Exhibits. And Exhibits is every letter that went out, including many to Fox News, to Hannity, to O'Reilly, to Greta Van Susteren, to Chris Wallace, to Britt Hume, to all of these people that I hoped and expected would come and do something that would investigate this. And this is 2012. I sent it to Michael Hastings as well.
Right.
And it was 6 months later, Michael Hastings went under. Now, what's interesting is this was going out between September 25th, 2012, all through 12 up until 13, and in June of 2013, just before that, Snowden went public. Now, Snowden saw my report in November, December, going through the TSSCI, Nipper, and SIPRNet channels, because it was bouncing around Booz Allen Hamilton. I had friends telling me, in cryptic language, we know you're there and things are happening. But my objective was just to keep ramming the drawbridge with that battering ram, just with the truth. And the next thing you know, Snowden leaves the country. Snowden leaves. And he, again, his tie to Brad Birkenfeld is legitimate and is traceable and is there. Julian Assange's connection to Birkenfeld with the WikiLeaks cables that were revealed. And then I came in and sort of completed the puzzle. And it was a divine, weird appointment. And it was then that Bill Nelson wrote a letter to Dianne Feinstein lambasting me and saying, how did this guy get a clearance? Not saying we need to look into this guy's report. We need to look into this military officer's report who has a top secret clearance.
Attacking your credibility.
That's right. Attacking me, not for doing my duty and providing intelligence, again, that was going to save lives of American kids in uniform, that was going to stop girls from getting their legs blown off as they come out of a helicopter on a rope, which I've seen happen. And all of these things were burned into my brain. And I thought, I have to get this out to brief someone so they can stop this terrorist financing that Brad Birkenfeld has. 19,000 bank accounts that Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, and Hillary Clinton stopped from getting to the American military.
And
that's
of course,
the case of treason.
Scott, of course, we've seen in the WikiLeaks email from John Podesta's email release, Hillary Clinton acknowledging that Saudi Arabia and Qatar are arming ISIS. Of course, General Flynn said very publicly, I believe on RT, that he felt that the formation of ISIS was deliberate. So when I heard the video that you made where you're reading the letter that you sent to President Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, and other things, people should really watch that video. It's a powerful video, and of course they can find you on YouTube. Let me bring that up. There's so many links I have open here that I want to address. But you filled in so many of the blanks. Your work is connecting so many of these loose dots. It's unbelievable.
Well, let me share something else with you too. In June of 2013, Michael Isikoff, or besides that letter that went out from Bill Nelson to Dianne Feinstein, which he should be investigated for and charged with treason, because he aided and abetted the continuation of terrorist financing by not acting on any of my intelligence, as well as Congressman Mark DeSaulnier in California and many, many others. But here's the other thing that's interesting that happened. Michael Isikoff of NBC News and Tom Hamburger of the Washington Post came up to prison and interviewed me right after Snowden went public. And they sat down, and for 2 hours, I gave them what I'm giving you here. Here's who I am. Here's what I know. Here's what's happened. You need to investigate this. And the only thing they said to me was, Tom Hamburger said, Mr. Bennett, why do you think the CIA would do this to you? and they never returned any of my documents that I gave them. I made
Wow.
copies, of course. But that shows you why Michael Isikoff, who wrote the Christopher Steele
Right.
story later, so he's a CIA asset, Tom Hamburger, that wrote the story about Donald Trump Jr. having access to WikiLeaks before they were published, which was later proven to be false.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Hamburger and Michael Isikoff are CIA assets, in my opinion, and I think that should be investigated by Congress as well, because you're not honest journalists.
Oh
You're
my
spinning.
God, this guy's from Syosset.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So they interviewed me, and this was given to them. I incidentally, right after I interviewed with them, my uncle and aunt and my cousin who live in California, their houses, both of them, in one of the cleanest, wealthiest communities in Northern California, they were both robbed, and their safes were taken.
Huh. You know
Largely
what's also
probably because,
interesting, Scott? This guy, Michael Isikoff, appears in a movie called Hacker Wars,
yeah,
which talks a lot about Anonymous and some of the mischievous individuals who like to hack into people's computers. I might have to watch that again and see what Mr. Isikoff is speaking about. It's amazing the connections between all
yeah,
of these different people and how incestuous this network of operatives, for lack of a better word. The playbook is always the same. You bring forward honest information that seems like it should be in the interest of the government, who want to protect the people of the United States, prevent foreign interests from gaining power and weapons and the ability to execute terrorist actions around the world and domestically. But yet, when someone like you brings this information forward, you get thrown into jail for a trumped-up charge. You know, right now, I personally am being attacked daily by a person who appears to be psychotic, constantly making up false accusations, and now sending reports to various government agencies trying to get me pinched. And when I hear stories from people like you, where you've actually gone to jail over fabricated evidence, it becomes concerning, because the person right now is accusing me of staging a bomb hoax at the port of Charleston, which I actually believe that he and his brother staged. They're the ones who brought the information, and they're the ones who did all of the things that made the phone calls, the tweets, etc., happen through apparatchiks and different people that they used to fool me. Journalists who earlier that day put out reports, in this case a journalist with my very same last name, who's been very vocal about using expletives to describe his opinion that I'm an idiot. This journalist put out a report that morning saying, hey, if you know of a pending emergency or disaster and you don't report it, you'll be guilty of misprision. So they try to craft this false narrative that blocks you into a corner. As you said, they arrest you for something totally made up so that then they can use that arrest to enable something else. I'm being sued right now by an individual named Robert David Steele, who is apparently ex-CIA. So maybe he's still CIA, and maybe he doesn't like it when I bring on guests like Scott Bennett, the author of Shell Game, who people should definitely be following on Twitter. Scott has amazing information that is just now starting to really break through the mainstream media shell, for lack of a better word. And I'm so pleased that we can connect and talk about your experience in the U.S. Army and working at CENTCOM and Booz Allen. I mean, you're not some guy sitting around smoking cigarettes, watching the internet and sharing opinions. You are someone who has been right in the center of the deep state and is fully aware of all of their tactics and these actual operations. And I mean, you are a casualty of this information war. It's amazing the bravery and resilience that you've shown, Scott. I'm so pleased to be meeting you and helping you share this story. I cannot stress the importance of this information. And it's really important that people support Scott and his work. I imagine it's difficult now with all these legal problems and being out of the professional world and having been in prison. I imagine that represents substantial practical challenges to finding work, and people can support Scott financially with the links here on his Twitter page, paypal.me, Army PSYOP, is that it?
Yeah.
People can help support the research, and I presume people can purchase the book, of course, on the website, which they can reach by typing in shellgameauthor.com, is that it?
Yeah, you just go to shellgamewhistleblower.com.
Right.
And, you know, the book is meant to serve people, to be a weapon that people can use, a crowbar that people can use to open up their congressmen and senators and challenge them and say, you're either on the side of exposing this or you're on the side of covering it up, which is a side of treason and criminality.
I agree with that.
That's what this is.
So instead of morons in Mount Shasta writing fake reports about how they and their brother set up a fake bomb situation by doing their own psychological operation to really scare me into thinking we were facing a possible 9/11 style disaster, and essentially coercing me into doing something that they're now trying to position as a criminal act, instead of wasting time printing up and sending stupid reports to their congressman about that fake nonsense, perhaps they should be spending time reading your book and writing letters to Congress and the various people that need to expose this incredibly dangerous situation where so many people embedded in the government are covering for the Clintons and for the Union Bank of Switzerland. Now, you and I really didn't get a chance to speak very much, Scott, before this interview, and you did share with me that you only want to talk about topics that you have personal experience with, and I respect that tremendously. But as soon as you mentioned Union Bank, I could not help but think about Prescott Bush and the accusations of Union Bank being involved in laundering money for the Nazis in the 1930s and 40s. And of course, I believe Prescott Bush was charged with trading with the enemy, among other things. Here it is. It says his business dealings, which continued until the company's assets were seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, had led more than 60 years later to a civil action for damages being brought in Germany against the Bush family by two former slave laborers at Auschwitz. So the Bushes have been up to no good for an extremely long time, as far as I know. Now, I don't personally consider myself a Democrat or a Republican. I just want criminals out of the government. You worked under George W. You've spoken a bit about 9/11. I fully agree with your assessment that a missile could do the damage that hit the Pentagon. I've been told, I'm not an aviator or an aerodynamics expert, but I've been told that a 737, a 757, flying that low to the ground at the speed that that projectile hit is simply impossible. The aerodynamic forces generated by the close proximity of the aircraft to the ground would prevent it from reaching the target and cause it to immediately crash. What do you say about George W. Bush now that you've been woken up to some of the reality about 9/11?
You know, it's like being kicked in the stomach by a Clydesdale horse when you discover the whole 9/11 scientific physical impossibility. And the science is all that matters, the science of the aerodynamics of flight. And I was in the Civil Air Patrol and flew, and I know the aerodynamics, and I knew the impossibility of a free fall speed building going down, such as Building 7, as well as the Twin Towers. And I know the impossibility of a plane just vanishing into liquid metal when it crashes into the Pentagon. All of that is nonsense. It's a psychological operation. It's a lie conveniently propagated by the military and the media. And we're waking up to it. When I woke up to it in prison, and that was where I really had the time and the quietness for men that came around me and said, Scott, have you thought about this? Have you looked at that? Have you considered that? And it was like turning on the light, screwing in the light bulbs that had been loosened, that didn't come on, and suddenly they came on. Everything started to electrify, and I thought, my God, this whole thing was a psychological operation. This whole thing was a scam, and I was outraged beyond words. But I had to process it. And there is a trauma that we go through, but it's like, regurgitating or vomiting out all the poison that you've been fed. And you have this enormous cleansing, this catharsis, this moment of reality. And you're mad. And I was especially mad because I had taken an oath. I joined the military to fight a war that was a lie, and that so many young kids have been killed and crippled and traumatized by. And by the grace of God, I had not. But I had discovered this in prison. I discovered the terrorist financing connections, and I saw the military that have been part of this. They're the first ones that should be executed for treason. Every single military person that has worn the uniform, that knows this was a false event, should be shot for treason because they have betrayed the Constitution and the trust of the American people. The American people created a military and a government and a constitution to preserve the domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, and to promote the general welfare of man, not to deceive the American public, not to play psychological tricks on the American public, not to create false flag attacks to justify a juggernaut war in the Middle East that is a complete lie. That is why we're on the brink of a civil war. That is why I think perhaps we are in a civil war, and the alternative media is blowing the trumpet to wake people up and say, leaders, stand at your post, stand at a position, use books like Shell Game as jawbones of an ass, and go in charging and slay 1,000 Philistines. Push these people out of government. Don't ask them. Scare the hell out of them. Put them in a corner and say, you received a letter from Scott Bennett about Shell Game and you covered it up. All of these people should be prosecuted for treason. They're war criminals. They've deceived the American public. And this is the moment in time where I think you see some tremendous momentum in people coming from various backgrounds and experiences that are enlightened by the 9/11 reality. It's sort of like that film Pleasantville. You got people who live in black and white and people that transform into full color.
Right.
We've come into full color, Jason, and now we can never go back. And we have a duty to bellow and blow and enlighten our fellow humans in America and across the world to say we fearlessly and unapologetically proclaim this was a lie, and everybody tied to it, starting with those in the military, need to be executed for treason because they betrayed our republic, betrayed our people. You don't have a right to go in the military. You go into the military because you're given a position of trust by the American people. And the moment you betray that for a pension or for a paycheck or because you think you look pretty in a uniform is the moment you should be drummed out. And the moment you cover up a false flag event like the attack on the Pentagon is the moment you should be shot for treason. Because that's where we are, in a treasonous environment. Tulsi Gabbard knows a little bit about this. Senator Dick Black knows a little bit about this. Rand Paul, I think, knows about it. Ron Paul knows a little bit about it. Very few people really have the audacity to talk about it like we're talking about it. But that's where our leadership comes in. We need to be raising up people to take position in Congress, in the media and the military, to proclaim this, because it's like our shoulder's been put out of joint. You know, when you have a dislocated shoulder, our shoulder in America was put out of joint on September 11th, 2001, and it's never been put back in joint. We've never been clicked. And yes, it's covered up by Hannity and it's covered up by Fox News and all these people. They don't talk about it, but there are some Americans that do, like Jim Fetzer, like Christopher Bolin, like Barbara Honegger, like Susan Lindauer, like Richard Gage, like so many others. And I know everybody kind of, well, I don't like this person or this person. You know what? It's not about personality or background. It's about the science and the physical evidence of 9/11 that proves the government narrative is a physical impossibility.
Yeah.
So that means something else happened. And who else covered it up? And the more we expose that, I think the healthier we as citizens are and the healthier our country is. We have to get this country back on track and expose and expel all of this poison, because look at what we're doing around the world right now. We've went into Libya and decimated Libya. I've interviewed Senator Dick Black many a time. What we did to Libya, and James and Joanne Moriarty, if you've had them on, they are wonderful people. You'd love them if you haven't had them on because they were in Libya. They can tell a hell of a tale. But what we did to Libya, we've sent all of these people up into Europe like a flesh-eating disease, and they have cannibalized and disrupted European life to the point of, I mean, rape and pillage and Brexit. And
I
yes,
just had
some
a
people.
guest yesterday who was a former Swedish police officer and we've had Swedish authors and journalists who confirm what you're saying. Scott, I have to tell you, I'm fully on board with what you're expressing here, and I think you're one of the most forthright guests that I've spoken to, and you've got so much information. Just to bring you back to that original question, I presume this answer means you're not as fond of George W. Bush as you were when you were working for him.
No, I think he should be tried as a war criminal. I think
Yes.
George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and
Certainly
Donald
Robert
Rumsfeld.
Mueller. Robert
Yep,
Mueller has been involved in covering it.
Robert Mueller.
You mentioned this Civil Air Patrol, and when it comes to false flags, I always go back to the granddaddy of them all, and the Bushes, of course, were there for the JFK assassination, and there's just been a major release yesterday. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to really dig in there just yet, but we're seeing more articles about Bush grandpa's ties to Nazis becoming clearer. A lot of times, I mean, and this all, people used to say, oh, Jason, this is ancient history. Why are you talking about this? But this all ties into what you're saying. While these people are alive, there are vast resources conspiring to cover the stories and protect them and their families. And their children are often, as you've described, with Donna Shalala's nephew being your lawyer. And, obviously he's a guy who seems to be towing the party line. There seem to be all these familial connections that guard the secrets and prevent people like you and I from coming forward. Now, this very persistent maniac who I've been describing, who keeps coming after me, he just won't let up, and he says the information that I'm bringing forward is doing nothing, and that people shouldn't listen to me, and that people shouldn't send money to crowdsource the truth, and he's trying to do the same sorts of things that they did to you: cost you your job, discredit you, bring false charges against you that can then be used to activate other measures that they can put against you. So it's very important that people recognize these tactics, these strategies, these frankly tired and obvious techniques, which, as you pointed out, through social media, we are able to educate the American public, and that is what they fear. It's not specifically me. There's nothing about me that is so great or fantastic, but my persistence to have guests like yourself to reveal what you talk about in your book, Shell Game, and to let people know that they should be subscribing to your YouTube channel and following you on Twitter and supporting you, because the system is designed to prevent, even if someone like Sean Hannity or Fox News wants to bring your information forward, that's not necessarily in his control. Now, here's a video that you published earlier today on your Army PsyOps Scott YouTube channel. It's only got 201 views, so this should be being viewed by the thousands and shared by the thousands. We've got 430 plus people watching us on YouTube right now. And of course, Scott, I don't know if you're aware of this, but just recently, as I've been persistent in exposing the financial crimes of ex-CIA agent Robert David Steele, he's engaged in charity fraud in New York State and possibly other states. I've been exposing evidence that I feel indicates to me, at least, that Steemit.com, something that was oddly publicized by Robert David Steele in his amended lawsuit, I believe that Steemit.com is a financial scam in and of itself, a Ponzi scheme that can be used to pay some of these online operatives who are doing the same types of smear campaigns that you describe. And the more someone is effective in getting the word out, if it's not the information that these groups want shared, there are huge resources brought to bear to silence people like you, people like me. And the evidence that I've seen indicates that Steemit.com is playing a role in that. And some of these players are using the exact techniques you describe. They've identified my use of social media to spread information like the information that you're sharing. They've identified that as a threat vector. But it's a threat vector to what? To their criminal activity? And they can massage the details and the facts and write these glossy reports and send them around to Congress. But a lie is a lie, Scott, and however pretty these people try to make it, they are lying. They are making up completely false statements about me, as they did about you, to try to silence us. And I'll tell you, sir, as long as I am alive and you and I remain in contact, I will not allow them to do that.
Well, and see, that's what establishes you as an honest, honorable, and real person that everyone can say, now I know Jason Goodman is a real good guy, because you've had me on to tell the story without any instruction, without any vetting, without any editing. I'm sharing what I've been through, what I've seen, what I've written, right off from the heart. And you putting that up there for your viewers to be nourished by, to experience, to filter, to test, is a sign of fearlessness and really love for the country, love for the truth, and love for your fellow man. So you're giving them this gift of having me give my story to make the listener healthier, stronger, wiser, more fearless, more equipped, and better trained to repel lies and to go on the attack, to be wielders of truth. That establishes you as the best man. Those others who don't put me up there, who don't have me on their shows, are either ignorant, or they're traitors and liars and participants in this great scam. They're counter operators.
Right.
And so people should recognize and go, you know what? If Jason Goodman has Scott Bennett on, he's a good guy. And not to tout me I'm anything special, but I'm honest and I'm telling the story that I've been through, that I experienced firsthand, and gold and silver I have not, but what I have I give unto you. The testimony that I have is part of my oath as an officer. I have a duty to report to the American people, this is what I discovered, and it affects you. It affects your kids, it affects your freedom, it affects your politicians, it affects our country, because look at these wars that we've gone on that we better get off of the right way, or else we're going to be bankrupt and decimated and have no freedoms or liberties. And it's time to stop all this. We've lost our goodness, our charisma, our reputation for peace and prosperity. We've lost all that in the ashes and smoke of war. And there's no reason to go to war with Russia. There's no reason to go to war with Iran. There's no reason to go to war with North Korea.
So pleased to hear about the denuclearization early this morning. Massive step by President Trump. I mean, honestly, that is one of the best things done by any president in a long time.
Yes.
And just to build on what you were saying, Scott, I don't want to ask anyone or implore anyone specifically to trust me or to trust Scott. I want them to review this information. I want them to review the things that happen around people like Scott and I. I'm not aware of someone coming forward and saying, hey, this shell game book is incorrect because look at all this other evidence. They don't do that. People aren't coming to me and saying what Jason is saying is untrue because here's the actual facts. They're using propaganda, lies, and nonsense to, as you said, distract people from the real information and create this sense of confusion where the average person feels like, gee, I don't know who to trust. I like the sound of this person's voice. I like the way they look on YouTube or wherever they might be, but that's not it. People need to look at the information. And Scott, as I said, I'm so pleased that we've met and that we're coming together, and I would really like to invite you back as many times as it takes for us to keep getting this word out. But what I also see as an important synergy between us is that my role, as I see it, is to bring together people like yourself. And I don't always know who's coming on the show, is telling me the truth, is not telling me the truth. Part of the process we do here at Crowdsource the Truth is that people can cross-reference all these interviews, and we can even as I said, synergy. There could be a future interview where you join some of our other guests and share opinions and talk, because sometimes there are people who I do trust, but then they say something that I don't agree with. Now, does that mean I automatically distrust that person and presume they're lying? No. Maybe that person is mistaken, confused, has some other information. We can work together and do, as the name of the program says, crowdsource the truth. I'd be very interested in having you speak with Harmon Wilfred, who has experienced some of the same type of suppression and oppression that you have. And I'm interested also from the standpoint that these guys who are self-proclaimed former military guys who have written books on cyber warfare and threat vectors and how to weaponize social media. I don't know how to do that. I'm writing books on how to use 3D cinematography to help an audience feel more emotionally involved in a film. That's the extent, and I have no former training in that. That's just my presumption based on observing people who watch 3D films. But Scott, the work you've done is absolutely incredible. The oppression and nonsense that you've endured is amazing. Sir, you, in my view, are an American hero beyond the scope of most. And I've dealt with a number of military veterans, and I have to say, sir, you are absolutely a shining example for everyone. As you've stated, I do not agree that simply putting on a uniform makes you a respected member of the U.S. military. There are infiltrators and criminals who are in there who need to be exposed. And sometimes they lie about what they were doing in Nicaragua. I can only base my statements on their own statements, and we'll examine that down the road. But I appreciate your time today, Scott. Is there anything you'd like to share with our viewers before we wrap it up for this, hopefully the first in a series of many interviews?
Yeah, I'm happy to join you again. Let me give you one other thing that you'll like. This is something that hasn't been released yet, but Andrew McCabe, you're familiar with Andrew McCabe, and you may know this, but maybe not. Andrew McCabe, when he was the FBI director, had sent 4 agents to go to Senator Dick Black's office. Senator Dick Black is the state senator from Virginia who went to Syria, who has communicated to Bashar Assad, the president, thank you for saving Christians in Syria. He has briefed Tulsi Gabbard on the futility of the operations there, how Saudi Arabia is really fomenting the unrest. So Senator Dick Black was a thorn in the side of the deep state because he was a voice of truth. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. He was also a JAG officer. I've interviewed him. I knew him in Washington, D.C., face to face, and I've talked to him many times. Here's the thing. Andrew McCabe, when he was FBI director, sent 4 agents to try and get Dick Black to engage Syrian terrorist groups, to have conversations with them, to allegedly get some Syrian journalist out of jail. Now, Senator Dick Black could smell a rat. He could feel in his gut something wasn't right. And his staff, and he said, I'm happy to help as long as it's not a terrorist group you're telling me to talk to. And the FBI, under McCabe, said, oh, no, they're not terrorists. Well, his staff did the research and said, sir, they are terrorists. This is a bad group they're trying to lump you in with. And he said, I'm not having anything to do with them or you. So what you see is Andrew McCabe was trying to entrap Senator Dick Black in conversations with terrorists so that he could leak that to his wife, Jill McCabe, in order to unbalance Senator Dick Black's Senate seat. Jill McCabe was running against Senator Dick Black.
Did not know that. There is so much that Andrew McCabe has done that is criminal.
That's criminal. That's fraud. That's abuse. That's racketeering. Why isn't Hannity saying Dick Black's name instead of just saying Jill McCabe is running for a Senate seat? She was running against Dick Black. Tell his name. Have him in front of the Congress. Have him on Fox News, because he will open up this whole story, and it will be like Robert Redford hitting a baseball through the lights in the Grand Slam of the Natural. This is the hugest thing you can imagine. McCabe, 4 FBI agents, Terry McAuliffe, Jill McCabe attacking Dick Black. Why? Because he also knows about the Benghazi issue. So Dick Black has enormous material in the Pandora's box that, when it's opened up, will add to McCabe's criminality. And
I'll tell you,
that's something that everybody should be calling their members of Congress to investigate.
absolutely. And I'll tell you, Scott, this thing that you're telling us, which I did not know about Senator Black, I mean, this makes Andrew McCabe's Hatch Act violation, the receipt of the the 1.25 million for Jill McCabe's state Senate campaign, wearing the T-shirt, using his FBI email, all Hatch Act violations. But boy, that's like a liquor store robbery compared to what you've just described. I mean, dealing with terrorists and trying to entrap a U.S. senator. They love entrapment. They love to set these little traps and force people into them. So that's amazing news.
I'll send you the interview. I'll send you the interview, and you can hear with your own ears, Senator Dick Black, and hopefully have him on. He's ginger about handling this, but it's going to come out. It needs to come out, and I've been trying to inspire him to really take this to the Congress.
Absolutely.
But it's coming out in bits. But that's the most amazing thing that when you see that and hear that, it blows everything out of the water. You look at McCabe in a whole new light, and suddenly you see, that's their game. And when you look at what they did to Flynn, 18100-1, making a false statement, Peter Strzok, changed that. You could see they were trying to do that eventually to Dick Black. That's what they did to me. They couldn't charge me with any crime. They could only say, you filled out a housing form wrong, and we're calling that a false statement. Even though nobody in the military has ever been charged for that by a civilian Justice Department, you're going to come in and do that against Bennett? Well, not for long.
Wow, that's really, it's shocking news. My guest today, the amazing Scott Bennett, the author of the book Shell Game, a report that reveals intense criminality, really shocking. I mean, we've talked about how what's going on right now is bigger than Watergate. This is absolutely the largest, most powerful, most sophisticated criminal syndicate in the history of humankind. It's stunning, and without brave patriots like Scott, we would not be hearing about this. People should follow Scott on Twitter. He is at Army PSYOP, and of course you can find him on YouTube. He's got a channel called Army PSYOP Scott, where he's got numerous videos, interviews, recordings of himself reading the report and speaking to various important people, sharing this information. I hope that people will subscribe and support Scott's work in an ongoing way. Scott, thank you so much for joining me on this Friday as we go into the weekend. I want to wish you well, and I hope we'll have you back very soon, Scott.
Thank you, Jason. It's been an honor. God bless you.
And thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.